Okie dokie, we may as well get started right on time. Welcome to the Preparing for University Study short course. This is week 3, and this week you're stuck with me, Chantelle Hale, as the main presenter with Matt Constable helping me out if anything goes a little wrong. But this week we're going to be talking about approaching assessments, what sort of assessments you might face at university and how you might sort of approach them and how you might start them and get the best out of your university study. So we're going to start with the different types of assessments, covering all the different things you might be studying. Then we're going to go getting started on assessments and then preparing the assignment submissions. We'll look at the marking rubrics that might be available to you, and then we'll look at preparing for exams, which is often a scary one for some students. So the basic types of assessment, and we'll get into the different nitty-gritties in a moment, but just to introduce you to it. The basic types of assessment, are diagnostic, and that usually happens at the start of a session or a beginning of a subject, and that includes aptitude tests or just tests to see where everyone's at. They're not necessarily included at university level, but sometimes it's good to know that that might happen in the first week, that your lecturer might ask you to complete a simple test to make sure that all of his students or all of her students are at the same level. Formative assessment happens during the session. It's to make sure that everyone's on the same page or that see where everyone's up to. It might be small tests or small assessments so that they can you can see where you're at and where you need to study further. It could even be in some of the IT Masters subjects we make students develop an app, and their first assessment is to create a submission for a proposal to see if they're at the right level that they should be. Summative assessments come at the end of a unit. So they would be exams or final assignments. They're meant to sum up all of your learning to see that you covered all of the objectives of this subject and managed all of the things you were supposed to learn. And then into the more nitty-gritty of the types of assessment. This is the sort of thing that most people have the basics of, but I'm going to go a little deeper. So essays are often the most common of assessments you'll face at uni. It's usually one piece of writing that you'll probably respond to a question or a topic. It usually involves analysis, evaluation, and a line of argument. And a lot of the first question we get is, what's the difference between an essay and a report? So reports, the biggest difference is that reports are more about explaining facts and information, and they're broken into sections. They're more likely to use headings, whereas essays are usually in response to a question or a proposition. Reports might be based on a problem or a case study. You would have essays are written for a lecturer or somebody knowledgeable in the field. Reports are often written for a person or an organisation. Both essays and reports use mostly formal English, and they should be objective. So no emotive language, no talking about what you think or, your feelings on something. But reports can use like bullet point forms, even though you still have to use full sentences to explain yourself. So for instance, this presentation here has just straight up bullet points as a reminder of what I should be saying next. Reports can use bullet points that don't have all of the adjectives and that sort of thing that explain things like essays do, but at the same time you still have to fully explain your thought. With essays, success in marking depends on the argument you've made and how well supported it is. With reports, success depends on demonstration of good research skills. Another form of assessment is portfolios. It's usually a collection of pieces you've created or made, items or evidence of learning. You're marked on the pieces and how well you've collated them at some stages. Presentations, that can be done to share knowledge on a topic. Now, at IT Masters, most of our subjects are actually done via distance, which makes sometimes presentations harder to do. We do have one subject where you have to record yourself doing a presentation, and you're marked not only on how you've interpreted a problem, but how well you've presented yourself, how well you've communicated, your verbal skills, and how well you've targeted your presentation to an audience. You could also be given critical reviews. Here you're given an article, a book, a chapter, a document of some kind and asked to review it. What's the author trying to say? Is it backed up in research? It's important to remember, and Matt's touched on it in the previous weeks when he talked about critical thought. Critical in an academic sense doesn't mean being negative. It means examining things and questioning the material presented to you from different perspectives. You're often expected to present a balanced view of an article that you're given for a critical reflection. What have they done well? What have they done poorly? And, you know, what evidence supports and doesn't support their article? So it's really important to remember that one thing, critical doesn't mean negative, it means more analytical. Hopefully that makes sense. If I say something doesn't make sense, feel free to just pop a question in there and I can give you more feedback on something. Next up we've got case studies. So that's a real world or a fake real world situation. We need to solve a problem and apply your theoretical knowledge to a practical situation. Given this is we're talking about university study and particularly in postgraduate study, this often involves critical reflection after you've approached the problem. So they'll give you a case study, they'll say, how do you solve this? And then after that, they'll say, why did you choose that? What were some of the thought process that went into that? You know, what were some of the possible outcomes, that sort of thing. Proposals, they're similar to case studies. You're given a problem and you create a proposal to fix it. Or even you could, like I was talking about earlier, where you create a proposal to create something practical. Tests, like I was talking about earlier, they can be mid-session tests, smaller, usually at home, some questions to see where you're at and give you an understanding of where you need to focus your study. One of the biggest worries everyone has is exams, which are often larger, much more intense tests and done at exam centres or the university you're studying at. This is usually a final test of your knowledge. How much did you learn throughout the semester? If other assessments usually focus on one or two topics, exams try to touch on all topics and to give a full overview of what you've learned. So we're going to quickly cover how to start an assignment, what you're being asked to do, what is your lecturer asking you to do, which seems like the same thing, except it's not always. One of the important things to do when you start an assignment is not only to look at what you're being asked to do, but to listen to any online lectures, face-to-face lectures, forum posts, whatever that your lecturer has said about your assignment. Especially if they're the marker. They're usually going to give you a little bit more information about what your assignment is, what they're expecting from you when you create that assignment. And then we'll cover working out what your assignment is worth and assignment criteria and marking rubrics. So I've just put up a lot of words here for breaking the assignment into key components. This is an actual assignment in an IT Masters course. There's a lot more information that students are given, but the basic idea is that they're given a little bit of information about computer forensics. And then they're asked to write an essay on the following: digital evidence gathering and its relationship to chain of custody. So while it's not specifically asking you a question, it is, however, giving you a topic, and it's asking you to tell the marker about digital evidence gathering and how it relates to chain of custody. So it's important when you get a question like this or any essay topic or any report topic or any topic, you need to know what's being asked, not what you want to be asked. One of the biggest issues, and I've marked a lot of assignments in my time, one of the biggest issues that we get consistently throughout marking assignments is that students don't answer the question being asked, and they'll create an amazing assignment and they'll say a lot of amazing things, but none of the things they're saying answer what we ask them. It's actually not fair to the other students if we mark based on what you wrote rather than what you wish or what you were asked to write. And a lot of the time, particularly in a subject, imagine you have 100 students and one student goes off the beaten path and answers something different. It's hard to mark them objectively. So when you break down an assignment question, you've got a few different areas. You've got things like instruction words. Those are the ones that indicate what you're required to do. So this one just has you should write an essay. So those are instruction words, and they've given you a topic, and that's got content words, define the topic. So it's digital evidence gathering. And then you've got limiting words. So those limit the topic from the first thing that you're given. So here it's and its relationship to chain of custody. So when you're first given an essay topic, one of the things you can do is to just simply break it down into what the topic is, and that's one of the most important parts, and then how they're telling you to approach it. So in this case, you've got a lot of freedom, and a lot of the time at a university level you will have a lot of freedom because we're asking you to think as adults and to think critically rather than just to answer a simple question. It's really important to note to read through your assessment at the start of every single subject you do. What will happen is you'll be given readings to cover, you'll be given lectures to listen to, different source materials, and some of those will be relevant to your assessments. So if you read through your assessments at the start and keep them in the back of your mind every single time you read anything from an assessment, from a subject, one of the great things is that you will know that information is something that you should note or remember or keep track of. So this is the actual marking criteria for the essay that I previously listed. And one of the things to remember here is perspective. So it's got the introduction is worth 25 marks out of 100, the body is worth 45, the conclusion is worth 20 marks, and the presentation is worth 10 marks. So ignoring the presentation for a moment, the body is worth 45 marks, and that's a lot of marks. That's a pass or fail given how good that is. But it's also worth noting that you've got your introduction is worth a quarter of your marks. So that will take you down 2 letter grades if you don't do well. It's really important to keep that in perspective when you break up how much work there is to do. A lot of the time, and I've been guilty of it myself, where you write your introduction and you're kind of like, well, I just want this to be over with, so you just write it and you don't think that much about it. But it is incredibly important. And it's important to remember perspective as you break up your assessment. What's worth the most and what isn't incredibly important. You won't always get this sort of thing that says generally approximately 10 to 15% of the allocated word count. It's good to remember that it's not all about the word count, but it is about how important something is. When they give marks to something, they're saying this is how much attention they're going to pay to it when they mark it. So it's really important to break your essay down into that. And it seems a little cold to just immediately go, well, this is worth 20 marks, so that's important, but not as important as this area. Except every single time I've marked an assignment, there has been one student who's focused on something that's not as important as the rest of it. And they've done a great job, but you can only get so many marks for an area. Moving on. And again, it's important to remember perspective when it comes to assignment weighting. So the percentage of marks allocated to your assignment should give you an indication of how long to spend preparing for it. At IT Masters, we have a lot of assignments that are, we call them hurdle assignments at the start of the session, and they're usually worth 10 or 15%. So if a student does poorly on that one, it's not the end of anything. It doesn't mean that they're going to have a particularly bad mark for an assessment, for a subject. If something's worth 50%, you need to schedule that into your time. So Matt spoke in earlier weeks about how important it is to schedule your time and to break things up into, and to tell people that you've got an assignment coming up and that sort of thing. And those major assignments, those 50% ones, those are the important ones to remember. Maybe tell your family. Maybe say, hi, to your wife or whatever, during this week I might be less helpful than I could be because I have to focus on this really important thing for me. I put them in my calendar straight away, and I usually put in a date maybe a week beforehand just as a reminder in case I haven't been checking my calendar religiously or looking to the future in my calendar. So that 1 week beforehand date comes up and I go, uh-oh, I haven't done anything. Now is the time to buckle down and to say no to my friends when they invite me out. So take note immediately of the assignment weighting. So you'll often be given in assessments these rubrics, and I've just pulled up, this is just a basic rubric that I got from the internet. And you'll notice that the marks, the differentiating between the marks is not high. It's 0.25 of a mark between each section. And that means the differentiation between each level is not extreme. So look for the differences, and you'll see that word again, critically analysing. So to get full marks on this one, you can't just analyse it. You need to look at it from that critical perspective where you look at all angles, you see different perspectives, and you think a little harder. And then you get down to the lower level where you've defined something but you haven't done any discussion or selection of any definition of a performance indicator. So this is just a basic rubric that I've pulled up. So you can see at the lower levels they've just done a thing but they haven't gone any further, they haven't thought any harder. And if you go further, and this rubric here relates back to that essay that I'd pulled up earlier. And this one is different because instead of giving you 0.7, you can see in the slide earlier, you got 0.75 of a mark, which out of 2 is actually technically a fail in that section. This one goes for, to get a pass, you basically need to do just the basics of what this topic content has said. So the first option is discusses factors which influence the validity of digital evidence. And to get a pass, some factors which influence chain of custody and validity of digital evidence and how they do this are discussed. So you have discussed factors which influence the validity of digital evidence. But you haven't gone into detail, you haven't been clear, you haven't been comprehensive, and you haven't demonstrated a real understanding of the topic. Hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully the idea of going a little deeper is clear to you guys. So if you just do exactly what the topic content says and no further, so describe the content of chain of custody and how it protects the validity of digital evidence, you can do that at a basic level and that will get you a pass. So it's important to remember if you don't go deeper, you won't be getting those higher marks. So approaching the question. So I talked earlier about those different ways to break up a question. One of the first things that I always do is choose key phrases and locate them in the material provided to you to study the subject. So your readings, your textbook, your lectures, all those sort of things. And then one of the things to do is to research these ideas online, in the school library, in the databases, even to just Google the terms. And like Matt was talking about in previous weeks, there are different ways to look up things. Google Scholar, your university will have a database to use, an online database, and they're usually incredibly valuable. That is one of those resources that you're paying for. Make use of them. And come up with a basic understanding of what you want to say. So what you have to do is to come up with the key phrases of what you're searching for. An example I would use is I had to write an essay on the impact of particular new technologies in education. The first thing I did was go into my CSU database and search educational technologies. Obviously I came up with a ridiculously huge amount of answers. That's not going to come up with, you know, a really defined area. Then you start narrowing your search. You can use Boolean operators and, or not. So you can say educational technology and add in another topic. Or you could say or and then come up with another way of phrasing it so that you can come up with either options. CSU database allows you to narrow your search, so it gives you further topics to discuss, to look for when you're Googling it and narrowing those topics down. So I searched educational technologies and then could just click a button and say higher education. I narrowed my search down to recent articles because the more recent they are, usually the more relevant they are to everyday topics or to topics, particularly if your course itself is quite relevant or recent. Google Scholar will allow you to do that, and Google Scholar will also do things like you'll search for an idea and then it'll come up with related searches. So what these do is give you an overview of a topic. Often you'll be given an essay with a question or a topic and you don't know what to say about it. The first thing to do is to just read a few articles, come up with an idea. Even if you're given an essay with a question, sometimes Google the question and come up with something. But even if you can't come up with something in that way, it's important to have an understanding of all of the topics given to you in this essay topic or report topic. One of the great things you can do as you're researching and even as you're studying just the textbook, create a collection of sources as you research. You could use Cite This For Me, which is a really great website if you're referencing, Word document, a folder in the cloud, any way, and I would recommend digital because it's searchable, that you can collate all of the information you found. So include notes on each search, the main subject, a brief overview of what it says, what arguments it supports, even quotes to include, and include all referencing information. This is why I mentioned earlier about reading your assessment at the start of the subject. You've got to keep it in mind because you'll read relevant information the entire time you study. You don't want to go back through your notes and go, oh, there was a quote here I could use, but I can't remember where it's from. It's best to keep some of the notes on everything you read that might be at all relevant. So if you keep if you've got a digital file of an article that you read or even a digital file of a textbook or a chapter of a book or something, make sure that they're called something useful and keep them preferably on a device that's accessible or in the cloud somewhere. Often all articles have the same words in the title and it's hard to find it again but if you think it might be useful, keep it. Particularly because these days cloud storage is pretty cheap and articles don't take up that much space. And it means that when it comes time to writing your essay, every single person has done that thing where they found an article and then they try and find it again, and they have to go through a million articles that are talking about the exact same topic but in different ways. So yeah, I like to keep these sort of notes digital so that you can search for a certain word. But everything you read, if it is at all useful, keep a copy and put a note, just a document. I've seen people use OneNote document so they can put all their subjects in there. Particularly, I used a OneNote document for a OneNote folder for all of my subjects, because if you're studying at university, there is a high chance that some of your subjects will be interrelated and you can steal references from the other subjects. You can't steal, obviously, old assignments, but you can steal references or information where you don't have to reinvent the wheel every single time. So breaking up an essay. Once you've got an idea of what you want to say, once you need to make that essay into something that can be submitted, don't be afraid to use the marking criteria as headings, sections where appropriate. Headings aren't always appropriate, and when in doubt, ask your lecturer, because in an essay they're not always allowed, but that can be a great way to keep yourself on track. If they're not appropriate, you can still use them while you're writing your essay and remove them later. So sometimes if you have, for instance, an essay that says, talk about this, talk about this, talk about this, or a report, sometimes it's really good to have those topics breaking things up so that you know exactly that you've covered every single marking criteria. And obviously that slide I showed earlier where one of the marking criteria was presentation, you can't have a heading for that one, but you can still make sure it's covered. With academic essays, a lot of the time people get so excited about one area, they don't cover one in enough detail. And like I was talking about earlier, if you've broken things up into important topics, if you've broken things up into the important percentages that they're worth, then you know, looking through it, if you've got the headings named after the marking criteria, then you'll know that you've covered something in enough detail. If something is worth 30% of an essay and you've only got a paragraph or two to it, you know that you need to spend a little bit more time on it. Introduction and conclusion can be covered last. They cover what's in the rest of the essay or report in brief. So don't be afraid to put them in after you've written the essay to make sure that you cover everything. So the introduction covers the main topics the main ideas that you're going to address and preview in the topic. And the conclusion should never contain any more information. It sums up and reinforces your arguments. If it's a report, there might be other areas like an executive summary. There's a lot of different areas that can go into an assessment. If you're ever in doubt in what should go into that assessment or into what area, Google it. One of those things is that people go, okay, I think I know what an executive summary is, and they just write it, and then you go to mark it and it doesn't cover exactly what it should cover. Google will be pretty clear. It'll say this is what should be covered. Even in a report, in any sort of piece of academic work, basic paragraph layout goes topic sentence, so that's what the paragraph is about. Supporting sentences, it needs resources, it needs to expand on what you've said, it needs more information. And then a closing sentence that should restate the topic sentence and then lead into the next paragraph. You shouldn't have too many topics in one paragraph. Ideally, your assessment should be pretty understandable if someone was just to skim the start and end of every paragraph. They won't get all the information, but they'll get the gist of your work. A lot of people think that longer paragraphs make it look, I don't know, better, or that you've done more work into it or something, but they can just make things confusing. It's always important to remember when you're writing an assessment that, oops, sorry, go back. Whoever's marking it is probably marking a lot of assessments, and they don't want to have to work to give you the marks. Whoever's marking an assessment, they don't want to take off marks, but if they can't find your information, it can be a bit of a slog to get through your work. And they're not necessarily going to take off marks for that, but you want to make it easy for them to give you marks. Next up, proofreading. I know it's a huge pain. I've been guilty of handing in essays without proofreading them, and I think everyone has, but it's really, really, really important. Particularly if you've done it in a bit of a rush, you've got to make sure that everything makes sense. Everyone's been guilty of saying something without explaining themselves clearly because they didn't verbalize one of the things that were in their head. That always happens in assessments. You have to assume that the assessor doesn't know much more than the general topic. And even with essays, when you've been told that it's going to be marked by the lecturer or the marker, you still have to define subject terms and that sort of thing. You have to reference everything you didn't come up with. When you don't reference something, the implication to the marker is that that what you're saying is something that you thought up. Yeah, and you can restate the questions, but essays should be written as a complete piece. So even without the title, we should still know what's going on in your essay. Even if you're asked a question, you should write the essay as if it's whole and complete without the topic question. Next up, moving on to exams. I can't emphasize enough how important it is to check the details for your exam, the date and time. Get somebody else to check it if you're afraid, if you're stressed that you've checked it wrong, and check that date is on a certain day. So look at that date and go, okay, it is on the 27th of September, that's a Tuesday, so that you know it's a Tuesday. Most universities, and you know, I can only speak for CSU at this moment, but most universities have no patience for I read the wrong date of my exam. They have to schedule exams for so many students, and I read the wrong date is just not the kind of excuse that's going to happen, that's going to work for you. Yeah, like I said, ask a friend to check it, put it in your calendar, and put the day before it in your calendar as well so that you know that you need to get a night's sleep. Read the format in your subject outline and familiarize yourself with it. So learn whether it'll be short answer, long answer, essay, that sort of thing. Check for practice exams. There should be one up. And it'll give you understanding of what you should be achieving in this exam. So hopefully there'll be answers. So you can see when they say I want an essay, they mean I need 2 pages or something. And again, perspective is really important. If multiple choice is worth 1 mark each and you have 20 of them, and then your long answer is worth 20 marks, you spend the exact same amount of time on the entire multiple choice section as the long answer. Use the marks for each section for how much you should write. If it's worth 5 marks, you should be aiming to write 5 marks worth of things. It's really important to break your exam up into times for some people. So I used to go into exams and say, okay, I have 20 minutes for short answer, I have an hour and a half for the essay section, and then I have an extra 10 minutes to double check that I've answered everything or to do all the leftover bits. So yeah, perspective is incredibly important when it comes to the marks here. When you're studying for your exam, read the textbook sections carefully and make notes. Textbooks are a prime material for where exam questions come from. Lecture slides are really good to read over to remind you of what was covered, but you can see in lecture slides here and in most lectures, they will just be prompts. You want to go to all lectures if they're face-to-face, and I know IT Masters has a lot of online lectures for all of our subjects, and they are always recorded and placed online, and it's important to watch those and do practice questions and relevant end of chapter questions and tutorial questions. Often you'll find exam questions are based on those, so it's really valuable to go over them. Once you're in the exam, you'll get reading time. Make sure you're using all of it. When you go through an exam, often hints or prompts for answers will be found in other questions. And don't be afraid to follow those hints or prompts, and don't think that that makes them any less valid. When you are writing an exam, you've only got so much topic to cover, so many topics to cover, and often when you've studied something enough, the words from another area that's related will remind you of the answer. This next point is incredibly important. Unless the exam says so, you won't lose marks for wrong answers. Answer everything. Give it a go. And at the end of your exam, go through your exam and make sure that you've answered every single question, particularly multiple choice, but even short answer, even essays, write something down. Often it might only be a few marks that you get, but it's still a few marks, and that can make the difference between a pass and a fail, or a good mark and an okay mark. So unless you're told that you will lose marks for wrong answers, answer everything. If you can't think of an answer at all, write down something semi-related. At the very least, it shows you tried, but you never know when you might have stumbled into the right answer. So obviously answer the questions you know well first. Those are the ones you're going to get good marks on. But give everything a go. You can't get marks if you write nothing. Often as a marker for an exam, we are definitely looking for the right answers, and we're just looking for keywords sometimes if we're just trying to find them a mark. When you're writing an exam, get to the point. You've only got so much time. CSU or IT Masters, we've recently started bringing in e-exams, so students will have the opportunity to sit their exams from home in front of a computer, but a lot of universities, and it's really hard to bring that in, a lot of universities haven't got that in their in their subjects yet, so your handwriting will get worse if you write too much. We just want to know that you know the answer. We understand that what you're writing in an exam isn't going to be as well written or well expressed as it would be in an essay that you submitted that you worked out at home. Or it shouldn't be, because the essay that you worked out at home you've had a lot more time for. You don't need headings. Use them if you want, but they're not necessary. You can use dot points or a new line for each paragraph or a new line for each point. Whatever you think will make it easier for people to see the points you're making. Neat writing. I feel bad for all the computer geeks who don't know, who don't have very good handwriting and who come into these exams and don't know how to get their point across and be understandable. Use all caps. You do anything you can to make yourself understood. Remember what I said earlier about someone marking your essay who has a bunch to mark? It's the same for exams. Often an exam marker will have a set amount of time to mark your exam. If they can't read what you're writing, then it's not going to go well for you. Referencing isn't required unless it's an open book exam, unless somebody has said that referencing is required. It shouldn't be needed. And there's no word limit. So use the marks allocated to indicate how many points to make. Some other helpful hints: read the question carefully. Do that same thing you did with your essay before. What's the topic about? What are the key terms? What is the verb? Basically, in an exam situation, it's nice and stressful, and everybody's done that thing where they read the question and it turns out they've read the question completely from the wrong angle. So read the question and make sure you're answering the right question. So I think that's about the end of what I had to say. I don't know if Matt had anything else to add or if anyone had any particular questions.
I've got nothing additional to add there, Chantelle. I think you've covered it beautifully, knocked it right on the head.
So I think some of the key points is just basically to don't be scared of assessments, and don't think that you have to approach them from a brand new angle or try something completely new and different. Sometimes it's just easiest just to answer the question being asked and make sure it's all being covered. Don't reinvent the wheel and don't make things hard on yourself. If you've got a really important question, if you've got a really important idea or a new idea, feel free to email your lecturer and say, I've got a new way of approaching this. Is this appropriate? The important thing is to answer the question being asked or to approach the assessment the way that it seems that the lecturer wants you to.
Just on in addition to that, Chantelle, it's a really good point. With a number of subjects that I've been running over the last few years, I often get, and some of them are essays, some of them are case studies, some of the assessments, but I'll often get requests from students about, sometimes they get a bit confused about what the general direction is. It may not be prescriptive. As you saw with that essay, it's a reasonably open-ended question. As Chantelle's pointed out, it gives you constraints, but it's reasonably open-ended. So it's quite all right that if you're not quite sure of the direction you want to take the essay, or you've got a specific idea, by all means contact your mentor or your lecturer, because that's what we're there to help. And I've certainly had that a lot with students, particularly in the last 12 months, asking about specific assessments and which way to go with them. So, you know, it's your assessment. You've got to try and get the best marks you can, so make sure you understand exactly what's being asked and make sure that the direction you're heading in is the right one. We can't always provide you with detailed feedback, of course, because that's not fair to everyone, but we can certainly give you a push in the right direction.
Yep. So Richard has asked how many sentences you were looking for in one paragraph. Probably about 4 or 5. If it's particularly long, a few particularly long sentences, then less. Don't go overboard. Think about how when you're reading something, and particularly you get those very dry textbooks and they have really long paragraphs, you get lost halfway through. Everyone does it. You don't want your marker to get lost halfway through. Richard's also asked, does the school accept the APA referencing style? CSU and IT Masters courses do. You will find usually in your subject outline or however else they've presented their assessment to you, they will specify a referencing style, and that's something you should always stick to unless you have a specific reason, and then you should always ask your mentor or your lecturer. There are a lot of great ways to get around if you're terrible at referencing. I know I am. That Cite This For Me site that I referenced before is a really good one because you can copy this style of referencing. So give that one a go. But yeah, just as long as you are consistent, it's usually going to be fine. But yeah, check whatever style of referencing the school is asking for. Have we got any other questions? I often thought we need background music so that it's not just silent. I've got a suggestion from one of the people there to sing, and trust me, if you heard me sing, you would retract that suggestion immediately. But yeah, so it looks like we're coming to an end. And the important thing I want you to take away from this is that I believe anyone can achieve a university assessment, but if you are ever scared, don't be afraid to ask your lecturer questions. If you're ever sitting there going, but I don't know if this topic is appropriate, then ask your lecturer. Victor's asked when exams start. So this short course doesn't have an exam, but if you're looking at university exams, they start at basically any time of day, usually during the day. So it does seem like we're coming to an end. You've suffered through my voice for a week, and next week we're back to Matt. There's a weekly task where I'm asking you to pick a topic that's related to your work life or to what you want to study, and try and take my advice of coming up with some references or some journal articles or something related to it and writing a little paragraph on it, just so that you can see that you can find things on a topic and how easy it is to write a little note about what it is and what it covers. Okay, so Atul's asked about what the topic is. Because everyone here is from different backgrounds and looking at studying different things, pick a topic related to a subject you'd like to study. So we've got, for instance, courses on information system security. You could pick a mini topic in that. So Richard's saying he's got no managerial position. So how is this course relevant to you? So you could pick a topic. So you're obviously, Richard, looking to study at a university. Do you have any idea of what course you're looking to study? Even if you were looking to study, say, a management course, pick a topic in management, so human resource management or, you know, project management, which we happen to have a master's of. Yeah, so pick project development and just see if you can't find a journal article about project development and HR, and then write a paragraph summing up that journal article, and maybe even include a relevant quote. Find something relevant and just sum it up. Get started on how to research, basically. Okay, that's about it. again, any questions, put them on the forums, send an email, give us a call, and we'll see you all same time, same place next week.